some
This
of the
conference will now
knowledge.
be recorded.
Sorry. Go ahead.
And for me, I was a tour guide, a tour director in China for more than 20 years. I led my own tours in China. I led tours that were very adventure tours in many provinces, but also I led tour more like VIP tours with journalists, all in French, of course. And I speak Mandarin. I studied Chinese civilization for a few years, and I was a China travel expert, and I sold tours to travel agency. I was in charge of many tours every year in China, and I worked with local partners, and I travel in every province in China.
Well, so that's a pretty heavy background. I was impressed when I heard that, and I suspect maybe some of you will be as well. Okay, so I didn't make it blatantly clear, but hopefully all of these discussion groups that we have throughout the year will provide content or insight or information that we can all use to improve our tours. So kind of the focus that I want to kind of drive down is how do you use, comment, or apply historical information or facts that you've learned along the way to your tours, and how can we all kind of maximize whatever information we can share. So just get started right off. I'll ask the first question that I put on the event itself. How did the Chinese experience at Ellis Island of the West, Angel Island, compare to the European experience in New York Harbor? Does anybody want to just comment or what you've learned on how the immigration station and the processing of incoming immigrants to the U.S. Were similar or different between Ellis Island and Angel Island? Anybody want to make a comment? Is that Francis? Take it away, Francis. We got to unmute you. Hold on just a second. There you go.
As I understand it, the difference was that in Ellis Island, everybody had to come to Ellis Island. That was just automatic. So in California, if your paperwork was in order, if there was no question about your paperwork, you didn't have to go to Angel Island. It was only if there was a question. So it wasn't everybody coming in that had to go to Angel Island. I do not know where the paperwork was checked, whether when you came in, they looked at your paperwork and said, no, you've got to go to, Angel Island. But I know that not everybody came through. So to say that it was the Ellis Island of the West is sort of correct, but not everybody went there. The other thing is that people tend to think that it was only people that were coming in from Asia, but there were people from Scandinavia and other areas, just not as many. That's my understanding.
Interesting. Thank you. Does anyone have anything to comment on that? Go ahead, Madeline. A fast hand gets priority. I'll have to mention. And once again, we need to unmute Madeline. Okay, so Madeline, can we unmute you? Let's see. For some reason, Madeline, my unmute, there you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
So my understanding is like that of Francis, that there were many different nationalities that came into Angel Island, including people from Holland, my native birthplace. And I was surprised to find that out, but there's been a lot written about the fact that it was not exclusively Chinese.
Interesting. Anyone else got a comment? Greg?
I just got a book in the mail that looks really interesting.
Angel Island, The Immigrant Gateway to America by Judy Young and Erica Lee. I very much look forward to reading it. She just died a few days ago, Miss Jung.
Has anyone visited the immigration station and taken a docent tour out there?
Yes, I have.
Let's see. Carolyn, go
Yes.
ahead. Can you bring any memories back of what you might have learned on tour? Unmute yourself before you speak.
I did not go back to any notes to research myself, but we did it as a tour, as a guild.
Right.
Yeah, it was wonderful. But we got to see their living quarters. We got to see some of the writing on the walls, and it was just and pictures of the people that were there mainly were Asians, and I don't know, I just found it very positive the way they presented the tour to us. It wasn't a lot of negative things, although it was, not a positive situation for the people there, but it was presented in a very positive manner. But the question came to my mind, what years did Angel Island was active versus the years that Ellis Island was active? It would be interesting to compare how similar years or so. Anyway.
We'll get to you just
And
a
I have
second.
a comment too.
Go ahead, Ken. Thanks.
Okay. One of the major differences between the East Coast and West Coast immigration stations occurred after 1906, when in the earthquake and fire, all the birth certificates and marriage license and stuff like that were destroyed. And then became the problem of people coming in as paper sons. And that's why they put them on Angel Island, and they went through rigorous interrogation. They had to know what their neighborhood looked like. It was all because of the paper sons. There were a lot of people that were coming in that way. And it was how the government reacted at that particular time. And that's one of the major differences between the East Coast and West Coast immigration.
Right. I'll piggyback on that, Ken. I took a tour put on by the Chinese Historical Society, which was good. And anybody who hasn't been in that museum well, I haven't been in for a year, but that's highly recommended if you haven't been there recently. But they impressed on me about the significance, and it's related to your paper sons problem, but Ellis Island, as the reputation goes, or at least was presented on that tour, was that it was pretty much forgetting about disease or any kind of medical issues, a welcoming station. They wanted to process all of the Europeans, get them through and get them out into the heartland to help build, the country. Whereas with the Chinese Exclusion Act and the prejudice against the Chinese, there was, in addition to the paper sons and just the paperwork situation, a considerable and a rigorous questioning process to kind of resist immigration of the Chinese. And the way they described it kind of put a whole different black and white perspective on the two immigration stations. But of course, none of us were there then, so I don't know how you'd compare it, but it was an interesting comparison. Anyone else?
Well, just to piggyback on what you said, I remember them trying to trick the paper sons up because they weren't real sons. So they had to memorize the script of where their new adopted parents were from and all the relatives. So they would know their family heritage and could prove that they were actually a real child and not just a fake one.
Right.
Yeah, and from what I understand, if a businessman went back to China, one that was already established here, he'd go back to China and then someone would ask him if he would pretend that his son was his son, and he would be paid to do that.
Right.
Paid quite a bit of money, I understand.
Well, Just kind of summarize and wrap it up, I think it's fair to say that there were enough differences that if it's appropriate on any of our tours, there are stories to be told about Angel Island beyond just saying it was the Ellis Island of the West. I remember when I was getting started, I was happy to say this was Ellis Island of the West, an immigration station, and leave it at that. But there's stories to be told in the whole subject. Moving on to the next one, I'd like to hear, and I dare say I'm expecting some varying answers on the second item. Were there really tunnels underneath the buildings and through the buildings underneath the neighborhood blocks in Chinatown? Who has any either information or stories to tell on that? And Francis is first one with a hand up, so we'll give it to you again.
I'll probably just have my hand up so anybody can jump in, but it's my understanding that there never were, quote, tunnels, that when you went down to the basement level, there were connecting rooms and connections between various buildings. So when you went down, you could go from one building perhaps to another, but there was these were connections on the lower level. This was not tunnels, but you could go from building to building if you knew where you were going. Very much like you could go from apartment across the roof or something like that. That's my understanding.
They could create holes in the walls of the basements, and they would cover it up with an armoire or a dresser or a mirror or a curtain to hide it. And then it could go for a number of buildings so that you had escape routes if necessary by going to the basement and moving furniture and going through the hole. And then someone would move the furniture back. And that was the way they went from place to place when they needed to. And there's even secret alleys in Chinatown. You got to look real closely. They're well hidden, but there are some secret alleys, and that was escape routes. You walked into the wrong street and you had the wrong Tong member or group of Tong there. You wanted to get the hell out of there pretty quickly. So they knew escape routes. They knew ways to get away, and that was part of their safety there in Chinatown. And yeah, there were ways to get from building to building through the basements.
Has anybody been to that art store down in Jackson Square? Because if you go down to the basement of that level, there's an archway and you can kind of climb up and see where the tunnel is and where it's been blocked.
Interesting. You say that's on Jackson?
I think well, I don't remember the exact street, but it's kind of towards Jackson Square.
There was one I think it's Pacific, was at one time the Hippodrome and became an art store.
Yes. Okay.
Is that the building you're speaking
of? Yeah, that's it.
That's the one. Yeah, that's the one.
I didn't know about that, but that's worth checking out. So you're saying that, and of course Jackson, I think, would be just the one street kind of down below.
Yeah.
Pacific being a little.
I was taken there and told that that was an evidence of a tunnel, but that's,
Greg, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, that was part of our big bus Barbary walking tour.
Barbary Coast Walk. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. We would go in there and into the tunnel, and it was a tunnel down to the shore, down to the water, and into Chinatown, and they would bring prostitutes and drugs and what have you through that tunnel.
Interesting.
So that would be different from Chinatown. That would have been part of the Barbary Coast as opposed to.
It was Barbary Coast that they're talking about.
That makes sense.
Well, that's good information. I didn't. Well, actually, I want to jump down just because I want to kind of make sure we cover the topic. Marvin did a food tour, and Sylvie, of course, is familiar with Chinese eating in China. And so I'd kind of like to take the discussion on to into the restaurant area or the food area. And first, I guess, Marvin, I'd like to have you comment a little bit about how guides can present and talk about food in Chinatown. And Sylvie, I'd like for you to talk about the difference between the food and Chinese meals and everything in China versus American food, because I don't know all that much myself personally about it, but there's quite a bit of difference as I understand it. So there's two topics. So I'll let each one of you take a few minutes or just a little bit of time, whatever is suitable, and share with us a little bit about food and China and restaurants. Marvin, take it away.
Okay, so first of all, it's so dependent on how much time you got in Chinatown, because I do know that sometime with your busy itinerary, you possibly only have like what 45 minutes in Chinatown. So if you only have like 40 or 45 minutes, your option might be pretty limited. For example, you cannot suggest your group to a sit-down restaurant. You possibly can only go to like just kind of like what I call it, like a Cantonese bakery store, and just get those Cantonese barbecue pork buns or the pork siu mai, just kind of like for a quick lunch. And I assume that with student group, that is basically how much time you have, because I remember with the student group they only give us like what 45 minutes. So with only 45 minutes, your option is pretty limited. But let's say if you have a adult group and you've been given like a time luxury of like 1.5 hours or 2 hours, then definitely you have a lot more option. But since Chinatown is dominated by the Cantonese speaking group, so like 75% of the restaurant in Chinatown are specialized in Cantonese cuisine. So you are not really going to see much other option, even though you do have a few, for example, like Sichuan province, like the spicy food restaurant in Chinatown, and some Shanghai specialty or certain Chinese restaurant, but still is dominated by the Cantonese speaking group. So most of the cuisine that is going to be like the typical Cantonese style, like the roast duck or the barbecue pork or what we call it the dim sum. So speaking about Chinese food cuisine, there are actually about like 8 to 12 culinary region. But same thing, Chinatown, you're only going to see mostly with the Cantonese style dim sum, or just kind of like those cheap, what I call like the free item to go. Yep. So, but now, did anyone have any question about any? Let's say if you stop at Chinatown and you need like any type of recommendation. Any question?
Are you aware of any specific restaurants in today's environment that are, if we were to need to take a small group somewhere in Chinatown nowadays during the pandemic, is there any information you have about the current situation in Chinatown for food?
So currently, unfortunately, we do see some restaurants close for good. One of them is, unfortunately, is the Far East Cafes. I think some of you probably know this place. It's been there for, I think, 99 years or 100 years. But unfortunately, that place was forced to close down like just about 2 weeks ago. And even though some of the other restaurants are technically still open, but due to the current regulation, unfortunately, they cannot do any sort of curbside dining. So I do know that a lot of these restaurants are suffering, and also some of the restaurants currently they're in their, I call it their hibernation or hiatus situation. For example, like one of the big dim sum places, I think some of you possibly use this place when you lead or the cruise ship tour. It's called the New Asia. Like this place, I think they rented their location to their grocery store that is located right next to them. So there's actually now a kind of like a grocery setting instead of a restaurant. So just unfortunately, it's just sad to say, well, these restaurants are currently suffering, and even some of the restaurant owner, they do have like interview in the local Cantonese news broadcast. Some of them they think that they might not able to survive past this year if the pandemic still continue on.
I got a comment.
Yep.
When I was doing the Mr. Toad tours, and Reed, you can comment on this too, you know all about it. We would go through Chinatown and we'd usually have just a short period of time that we had in Chinatown to do the fortune cookie place and to get a little food for people because it was time near lunchtime.
Yep.
And what I did is I always went to the same place because they got to know me. They got to know my customers and they knew I was on a time schedule. So if the place was busy, there would be one person come over and take care of my group so I could get my group through there and out of there. And they knew I was going to be back day after day after day. So they didn't want to treat me bad. Of course, they don't in Chinatown. Everybody's pretty nice in Chinatown. But they want me as a long-term customer. And that's what I suggest. If you're going to be doing a Chinatown tours on a consistent basis, develop a relationship with a place you're going to get your food. It may work out to your benefit in the long run.
Yep.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great idea, Ken. Where did you used to take people?
Chinatown dim sum.
Yeah.
Right
I would do House of Dim Sum because it was around the corner from the fortune cookie factory.
Right. Well, that might be the same place. I haven't been there in more than a year. In that alley.
Yeah. But that was always good.
We were lucky. We could park in those days. We could park our Mr. Toad antique cars in Ross Alley.
Yeah.
And June, the barber and the fortune cookie people would watch the car. And we went over to the dim sum, so the cop wouldn't put a ticket on it. And we just developed a relationship in that little section because we brought so much business in there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
they
right.
took care
Marvin,
of
that's
things.
the place. Yeah.
Marvin, what do you know about Grant?
What do I know about what?
Grant Place.
Oh, Grant Place? That is usually the place that I go with a group, but depending on how big your group is. Because with Grant Place, even though the owner, Elaine, she usually really take care of us pretty nice, but unfortunately, is the limited interior space. So I usually recommend that if you have a group that is less than 25, then that is actually a good place to go. But if you let's say if you have a group that is 50 or 75, I do like a new location that is just adjacent to Grant Place. It is called this restaurant.
Can't see
it.
It is called Chinatown Restaurant.
Oh, yeah. You took us there.
Well, so this place, they claim they are specialized in Northern Chinese cuisine, but the owner is still ethnic Cantonese, so they can still do like okay Cantonese cuisine. But what I like about this place is it is also one of the oldest continuous operating restaurant in Chinatown. And second of all, they just renovated, I believe, like about 1.5 years ago. So the interior setting is pretty nice for, let's say, your cruise ship group or any adult group to go there.
Marvin, can you hear me? It's Madeline. Could you give us the address again or put it in the chat one way or the other so we're clear? I wasn't on your tour.
Okay, so with this restaurant called Chinatown Restaurant, the location is 744 Washington Street.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And also, do you know anything about the Oriental Pearl, what the status is of it?
Oriental Pearl. Well, I tried to call them, but no one picked up my phone call. So it's really like a big mystery right now. I really don't know if they're still operating or they decided just to shut for the next 3 months.
Right, I tried to call them too. Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, two good books for Westerners about dim sum. This is very good. The dim sum field guide by Carolyn Phillips for a Westerner, and also dim sum, the art of Chinese tea lunch is also very good for Westerners for understanding dim sum.
Excellent, good.
And also,
That's by Ellen
and then
Blond,
also,
BLONDER.
Wonderful. Now, Sylvie, would you like to share with us how you educate visitors to China about eating in China, and if you can carry that forward to comparisons between what we have to do in San Francisco versus what you've learned to do in China, that would be kind of, I think, interesting for us to hear. So take it away, Sylvie.
So, eating in China is really important. So, because with my groups, I had to order food twice a day. So I kind of became really expert about food in China, and I wrote a dictionary, French Chinese, with, I don't remember, but something like 200 different dishes. In China, when you travel, you really have different cuisine. In Shanghai, they don't eat spicy. Sichuan and Hunan are very spicy. Beijing is also another cuisine, but the best of all, of course, is the Cantonese cuisine, where they eat fresh and not spicy, but very fresh, and a lot of seafood, of course, and the famous dim sum, which are also, you can eat them in Hong Kong. So when you order food in China, you never eat alone, or it's very rare. You do it very fast. But when you eat food in the restaurant, you order according to the number of guests, usually one dish extra if you have 12 guests. The best is between 8 and 10 because the tables are round, and we could sit 10 people. That is the best. So you order, if you are 10 guests, you order at least 11 dishes, and all the dishes are equal, sweet or sour, spicy or not. They are all equal, and they are supposed to arrive at the same time on the table. And all the dishes are to share. You don't eat your own dish by yourself, just never. You can make break during the meal to drink alcohol. So you don't eat, you just drink for a few minutes, and you give toast to everyone. You make a small speech and you drink to everyone, to something special, and then you start eating again. So it lasts a long time. And compared to what we find in Chinatown, I think in Chinatown, here, the restaurants are only really, I'm sorry, but very low quality restaurant like canteen. You can eat fast, it's not bad, but nothing compared to what you will find in Guangzhou, for instance. So for me, I really didn't appreciate the restaurant in Chinatown for many years, but finally I found one restaurant that I like, only one, and I don't know how he is doing now. Maybe I'm sure it's closed, but it's on Broadway. It's called Broadway Cafe. And I usually don't have meal with my clients in Chinatown, but when they ask me a recommendation, I give them this address, Broadway Cafe, and also the one just next by, which is Live Kitchen, I think. Live, I had it on my Google
China
Map.
Live.
China Live, yeah.
Yes, thank you. China Live, because I tell them, Broadway Cafe, if you are adventurer in food and you can check on your Chinese neighbors, what they eat and kind of order the same thing or test, you are more, adventurer, you are not afraid to eat something you don't know. So Broadway Cafe is ideal. If you are more delicate, you don't know, China, what is the name again? Sorry, Live.
China Live. China Live.
China Live,
China
it's very
Live.
convenient because they have different chef. You can see the dishes before ordering, so it's very convenient. It's more expensive, but it's also a little bit more sophisticated.
Hey, Sylvie, I have a
Yes.
question. What is a typical day of what they eat during the day? Like, I know a lot of Chinese eat porridge in the morning, but is that true all over the country?
Sorry, in the morning, can you repeat that?
Yeah, like in the morning, do Chinese people, do all of them all over the country eat porridge? Is that a typical
Oh
breakfast?
yeah, that porridge is so delicious. Yeah, it's very wild, very wide spread. They eat a lot. That's porridge, but not only. And breakfast, it's an equal meal with lunch and dinner. So you can have anything you want for in the morning, but uh, most of the hotel today, they serve the Western breakfast or a mix between Chinese and Western style. But it's true that the porridge is really a common dish for breakfast, but also other dishes, even some which are a little bit strange for us, I will say, based on my experience leading tours in China, the breakfast is the most difficult to adapt among the free meals. So usually I tended to do the breakfast like Western style and then lunch and dinner Chinese style, 100%.
Marvin.
So just going to add a few. So indeed, porridge is a widely thing, I will say, item in for the in a Chinese breakfast situation. But also we have to see depending on what region it is. For example, porridge, we definitely see that very common in like Canton Province, Shanghai, and anywhere kind of like south of the Yangtze River. But northern China are somewhat different compared to like south of Yangtze River. So in the northern part, for example, like Beijing, we also see people like, well, they're having like the steamed plain buns as their breakfast. Or we also see like veggie buns and then also meat buns. But since we're talking about Chinatown, mostly we're gonna see like porridge, and then also they usually pair the porridge with this like long fried stick. I called it like the Chinese churro, even though it is not sweet. It is called youtiao. Direct translation, it means wavy stick, but usually that go pair with the porridge.
What are the times for breakfast in China? How long typically, or how deep into the morning does breakfast typically consume in a Chinese day? Is it over pretty much by 8:30 in the morning, or does it go on until 9:30 or 10? What can you tell us about that?
So let's take Chinatown as an example. Since 75% of the population are Cantonese speaking group, so they take their breakfast pretty long. So in many of these restaurant, we do see they run their morning menu all the way to 11 o'clock, from 6 to 11. But this is Chinatown.
But what happens in China?
It's so dependent on what region. So let's take Canton province as an example. It's basically the same thing. You do have a number of retired folks. They really have nothing to do, so they just take their morning very relaxing. They just go to their local tea house and start drinking tea, talking with their friend, read the newspaper, and they can spend the entire morning from like 6 or 7 all the way to 10 or 11. But of course, since now everyone is busy, so of course the younger folks or the working class, they possibly just have to do just like what the New Yorkers are doing, try to finish their breakfast on Subway.
Jeez. Speaking of the subway, and moving to a different topic, I'm just wondering if anybody in the group has any up-to-date or information on the Chinatown subway in San Francisco. What's at this time? What's the expected opening date for this ever building project? Go ahead, Marvin. You got an answer on that?
Yeah. So just a few days ago, the local Cantonese news broadcast, they claim that, well, the project will meet further delay. So they are not expect the project will be completed until July of 2022. And that is just they finish the basic construction. And they will need at least 6 months to test the tram that running on between Chinatown and then to the station. So I don't know. According to San Francisco efficiency, I don't know if we're going to see that train running until like what 2024 maybe.
That's probably right. Okay. Any other closeout questions on food and in Chinese food? Francis, go ahead.
Just a quick question for Marvin. What do you think about City View?
Okay, so City View is actually not a bad location, but however, I believe back in 2019, they do have these severe leak issue in their basement, so it didn't really smell that great for a while. But I think when the business reopens, let's say next year, I think those smell will be going away. And what I like about City View is there is a hidden temple right adjacent to the city view. And for those of you who've been on my last the food tour last February, I don't know if you guys remember that secret temple, because I mean that's if you're run on a very tight schedule, at least if you go to City View, at least you can still go to this temple like right after you finish the meal.
Right across the street, isn't it, Marvin? Right across the street.
Yep, right across the street there's a little hidden temple, right across the street, adjacent to City View.
Right.
Yep. So you can ask your bonus, and you don't have to run all the way to Waverly Place. And then also speaking about late night option, because some of you possibly will run into client that will be asking you this question. It's already past 9:30 at night. Any places in Chinatown that lay open and past 9:30 and all the way to like midnight? There is actually one place I recommend. It's called the Yodli Restaurant. I think they located on Stockton and
Broadway.
Broadway.
Oh,
Yep,
yeah.
Stockton and Broadway. Yep. Usually this place lay open all the way to I believe 2 a.m. 2
Wow.
a.m. So if you have any client that is asking, let's say if it is like 10 at night, they want to go to Chinatown for like a sit-down restaurant, at least this place is one of the options you can consider.
That
Very
place.
good.
Yeah, hopefully they survive this pandemic.
Yeah, it's right on the corner.
Yep.
As I understand it, Hakka cuisine, and Hakka being a language, Yuetli.
Well, this restaurant, I think that this Yodli is Cantonese.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. I'd like to know if one of you an experience with the very high class restaurant on Waverly. Mr. Liu, I think it's
With you.
Mr. Liu, right? Mm.
Mhm.
Do you, any of you, have you been there or?
Not yet.
I've looked inside there. I
Yeah.
have not. I've not eaten there. It presents very well. I don't remember inspecting the menu very carefully, but it does get in the travel books. It's rated high, but I can't speak from personal experience. Um, and there's another one that's on Kearney, I believe, Kearney at Washington, I think. I don't remember the name. What's the name of that?
RNG.
RNG long.
RNG, right? That's very popular. Always loaded with
Mhm.
people.
Yep. Hmm.
Right. Okay, we had enough food. Let's shift the dialogue to the pandemic and one of the books the guild. Oh, you can't see my camera, but the Barbary Plague book by Marilyn Chase came out earlier, and there was some discussion on that. And I think there's a connection between the experience in San Francisco of the bubonic plague back in the turn of the century and the Chinese restaurant. I mean, Chinese hospital. Of course, the Chinese hospital in Chinatown has quite a story about it. Does anybody have information about the origins of the Chinese hospital and basically why such a big uh, um, institution came to be? No one? Well, I'll kick the ball off by sharing what I think to be part of the origins was when the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed, 1882, 83, in that time frame. Of course, the Chinese were required to be in Chinatown overnight, and unless you had a good reason, as I understand it, you really weren't supposed to go out unless you had a specific destination. And as a result, there was medical facilities, not at the hospital level, but there was an infrastructure for medicine created in Chinatown at about that time. Does anybody have any information on that to piggyback on?
Yeah, it's probably it was created at that time also because during the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Chinese people, they cannot go to public hospital.
And the
They were
hospital.
not allowed.
Oh, right, I believe that's correct. But then, of course, Greg, you had a comment?
It's also been in various locations. I believe it began on Washington, and after 1906, that was destroyed, and that's for the current hospital on Jackson. I believe that's correct.
Right. Well, with the plague, of course, the Chinese were blamed for the bubonic plague at that time, and of course, the cases were in and around Chinatown, and I think the hospital itself grew out or emanated from activities in and around the plague experience, because the Chinese hospital didn't get started until later on, couple of decades after the Chinese Exclusion Act. So from that point forward, the Chinese hospital served the community, and as I understand it, it's a significant institution in the community. Can you comment on that, Marvin?
Oh yeah. So I think about that plague that happened back in the 19th century. I think some local historian eventually did find out where the sources, where was the source of that plague. It's actually, well, they think it's possibly from some vessel that is coming from Australia. But unfortunately, the Chinese got blamed for spreading the bubonic plague. And also one thing about that hospital, well, since a large majority of the population in Chinatown, they are really horrible in English. So even if you give them a doctor, but if they cannot able to communicate with the resident in fluent Cantonese, well, there's of course, I mean, basically the two sides cannot communicate with each other. So of course, the local resident, like, well, since they have this language barrier, so of course, this hospital is kind of like their only option to go to. And also, I think 80 years ago, Bruce Lee is also born in the hospital as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, Bruce Lee was born in 1940 in the Chinese hospital, and only 15% of the heads of households in the SROs are fluent in English.
What was that percentage again? I missed it. What was the number?
15%.
Wow.
85% are not fluent in English in the SROs.
Is that currently? Yes. Oh, wow.
The average age in Chinatown is 50.
Greg, would you repeat that? I kind of lost the continuity of your percentages.
15% of the heads of households in these SROs, single room occupancy, only 15% are fluent in English. And the average age of people in Chinatown is 50, 50.
Okay, yeah.
Did not know that.
Greg, I like that stat. Where did you get that from?
I'll check. I'm putting together questions for the new test. I'll go back and check my source, and I'll send it to you.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. One thing I always mention about the plague and just the general treatment of the Chinese during the Exclusion Act and even afterwards, and I got this in, it's really vivid when you go to the Chinatown Historical Museum, and when it opens back up, I encourage everybody to go there, because the one thing I tell my guests, if you look at the playbook, the racist playbook that they were using for the Chinese, they bring disease, they bring crime, they steal jobs, yada, 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 yada. If you took the stuff out of the Chinatown exhibit and crossed off the word Chinese and put in Muslim or Latino, it would be the exact same, excuse my language, bullshit that you hear today. Now, I get away with this because I have no more than 3 people in my car, and it's pretty self-selecting. I think it's pretty clear I'm a liberal guy. However, every now and then I have gotten people who are a little on the conservative side, and that's when I ramp it up. That's what I really say. By the way, you know, that stuff we're hearing about, you know, Muslims and stuff, it's the same thing they were saying about the Chinese a couple hundred years ago. You should go in and check it out because it really opened your eyes. The racist playbook never changes. And then they usually will go, oh, well, I'm not racist. And I said, oh, I know you're not racist, but yeah, you ought to, next time you hear that, you might really consider that this isn't anything new. This is an old script with new names.
Totally valid point. Go ahead, Margaret.
Okay. Yeah, so about that part, usually I also use the Irish and the Italian as the example as well.
Absolutely,
just kind of show that, you know, indeed similar situation also happened back in the East Coast as well.
That's right. The East Coast had the Irish and we had the Chinese. They always had to be an other, right?
Other, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Madeline, go ahead.
I remember taking a tour many years ago with the San Francisco Museum and Historical Society, and we went to the Chinese hospital, and we stopped there before this new building, and they said to me, or to our group, that the old building had been erected there in 1924 and it was really run down. But you know, the people in the community needed help and they had, like Marvin said, the language things. And here's an example of what it cost to go to the Chinese hospital in 1945. Board and care for a room was $6. And here's I don't know if this shows, but
More than that
here's
today.
an actual kind of copy of what the hospital bill looked like. And it was like incredible. It was by, if you needed the operating room or anesthesia and oxygen, $1.25.
Oh my God.
X-rays were drugs, 25 cents. Dressings, 75 cents. Sales tax, 6 cents. And then they would have a paid stamp on it. This was your hospital bill.
Oh
So I
my.
thought it was interesting that they had copies of that and they gave it to everyone in the group. It was a really interesting tour that gave me quite a different look at why that Chinese hospital was so important to the community, because like Marvin said, it had a lot to do about the other and the language that they couldn't speak to the doctors otherwise.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Greg.
The source of my statistics regarding Chinatown is Wikipedia, and it's Chinatown, comma, San Francisco. So go to Wikipedia, enter Chinatown, comma, San Francisco, you'll get all the statistics.
Right.
How are we doing on time? We got time for one or two more discussion topics, or is anybody up against the clock?
I just very quickly, Len, you mentioned this is pandemic. I've been studying about the 1917 influenza,
Okay.
and I wanted to compare it. The 1917 influenza killed more people in the United States than have died World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the Iraq War.
Right.
But we think a lot have died now, but in comparison, it doesn't even meet the numbers. So
That's
And you know,
quite interesting, isn't it? Go ahead,
I have
Marvin.
heard statistics
speaking about
worldwide
pandemic-
that
Yeah.
pandemic lost about at least 500,000 worldwide in 1918, 19.
oh yeah, billions. Yeah, I think it was 3 billion or something. Half the
That could
population.
be, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But
It
that
was-
died. I mean, talking about the number of people that died.
One last
Yep.
comment on the Chinese hospital. It's the only Chinese hospital in the United States.
Wow.
Interesting fact.
I didn't know that.
Okay, and just one thing, speaking about pandemic, actually Chinatown is currently, they are doing an excellent job on stopping the spread of pandemic, because if we take a look at the same statistical number, Chinatown is the most densely populated area, only right next to Manhattan of New York City. But currently Chinatown, I think they only have less than 150 cases in the entire United States. So currently, it is definitely a miracle that they can able to control that number so low.
Okay.
Yep.
That's an amazing number that I hadn't heard. Is there a obvious explanation for that?
Well, because many of these residents, they've been through SARS back in 2003, or many of their relatives been through SARS back then, so they all know the protocol.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
they all know the protocol. And you remember March, April, everybody say, no, you don't need to wear a mask. The Chinese people in Chinatown, in San Francisco, they all wore a mask since March, April, and May. And it's true that the average of contamination in Chinatown is very low in San Francisco.
A lot of people in China wear masks just every day. That's their,
Yeah.
you know, Marvin knows that. I was
Yeah.
surprised to see that there.
Sylvie, I missed the word, or you said the average something.
I just want to, the average number of case in Chinatown is very low.
Okay, yeah, right.
And I think they know how to deal with, being so many people and dealing with that. And especially, they were the first in San Francisco to they all wore a mask very early during this pandemic.
Interesting.
Mhm. That's true.
Okay, I'd like to close out with one other topic, kind of general. Marvin and I spoke of that a little bit, and maybe Sylvie, you have some information, if not for San Francisco, in China tours. What's the proper etiquette for Westerners, or what are the rules that Westerners need to know when they're visiting a Chinese temple of whatever denomination it might be? What should all visitors be aware of before they go in?
Maybe take off your shoe.
Your shoe.
What was that?
Leno, I rescued me in time to get in part of. I just came from work to the discussion. I enjoyed so much. I've been shuttled from clinic to clinic, and they know me around there, and they say, "Oh, you're here now." I have fun being around the Chinese clinic. Take off your shoe is a big thing with Asians. And the color white, they don't like to see the color white. So the nurses can wear Tweety Bird and Roadrunner and Betty Boop. Yeah.
I believe that's Anthony. You're calling in on okay, so it's for those who might not recognize the voice, it's Anthony Gathanova, one of our members, very conscientious guy, and thank you for sharing that. So to summarize, take off the shoes and avoid the color white.
Oh yeah.
Why would we avoid the color white?
Death. Death. Death.
Death
Marvin,
color.
you know the answer?
Yeah, I think someone stated the answer already, because usually people wear a white in a funeral situation.
Yeah.
Yes.
And movies with the number 4 or books with the number 4 might not do good because the number 4 is similar to demise, Yeah.
Well, I think at least one of us learned something on that dialogue. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
What is Marvin? You got a comment?
Yeah. So but this is really old school. But some temple in Taiwan or maybe Hong Kong, they still have this practice. Some particular temple, they don't allow women to go in when you have your period.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is really, really old school.
I don't think I'm going to bring that up on my tours.
Yeah.
Greg, go ahead.
We got number 4, the Shackley building on Market Street used to be 444 Market, but because of the implication of number 4, they changed it to one front.
I couldn't understand.
I couldn't either.
What did they change that,
We
Greg?
couldn't hear you, Greg.
The Shackley building
Okay.
at Shackley building at Market in front. The address used to be 444 Market, but because of the negative connotation of the number 4 in the Chinese community, they changed the address to number 1 front.
Okay.
Number 1 front. Okay.
Oh,
That is a fascinating trivia question for.
Yeah.
And that's related. I don't know if anybody remembers. I think they've torn it down now. The McDonald's out at the Haight. had a phony address because
Right.
they didn't want to have fast food in the neighborhood they hate. So they put it, the address was on Stanyon, I believe, where the front door was on Haight Street. The
That's
post
where I
office.
work. 730 Stanyon. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, the post office rules say that the address must be on wherever the front door is. So, okay, temples. Anything else on temples, Marvin?
Yeah, so usually with the temple, I think for us when we go to Chinatown, our option is actually somewhat limited. I think most of us go to this one. It's the Matsu Temple, located on Beckett Alley. This is usually the one that we go to. But however, if you have, let's say you have the time, I would recommend going to the temple that is located on Waverly. But however, this temple located, I think, on the third floor or the fourth floor, and they have no elevator. So so before you go, just make sure that everyone in your group can able to take this long step of like going onto the third floor. And then also, let's say if you go to a temple, well, every temple they have like different regulations. For example, like the Tinghou Temple, they don't allow you to take the photo whatsoever. But with the Matsu Temple, it's so dependent on who's there. I mean, it's so dependent on if you run into a nicer docent or serious docent. But what I really like to go to this temple. It is just across the street from City View. Yep.
We can't read it.
It is located on 687 Commercial Street. It is called the San Francisco Quang-Ti Temple. Because this temple is, you don't really see tour group go there. So usually the docent who is at this temple, they really love to see tourists go in. And I think this is the only temple so far they allow us to take photographs.
Commercial Street.
Yep. So once again, it's called 687 Commercial Street. But however, before the pandemic, this temple only run between 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And then before you go in, there's like a little button on the side. You have to press the bell, and they have to buzz you in.
Interesting. Madeline, go ahead.
Well, when I was doing a lot of the Chinatown tours for Linda, I would go to Gold Mountain.
Yep.
And I established a very good rapport with the nuns who were mostly, believe it or not, Vietnamese. And that is a beautiful showcase. But again, it's something you really need to make an appointment, or you need to know them. And there is a doorbell. It's on Sacramento near Grant, and it shows very well, and it's a larger space.
Right.
And then also right before the pandemic, I think there is a new temple just opened on Clay Street. I think it's just like 3 stores away from the historical Samwo restaurant. But it is a Guanyin temple. But I really don't know if this place is still open after the pandemic. But otherwise, the Guanyin temple that is newly opened on Clay Street, this temple does open up to like, I think 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. So hopefully they're still open. And after the pandemic, let's say if you have an evening tour, this might be the only option, because the other temple that I just mentioned on Commercial Street, it closed at 2 p.m. And then the two Matsu Temple, the Tinghou Temple on Waverly, it closed at 3 p.m. And then so as the Matsu Temple.
Super. Francis.
I just like to put in a plug for Tin Hao. First of all, it's at least 4 stories up there. You just, when you think you've gotten around the last corner, it's another corner. It's appropriate to give a donation, particularly if Susan, who is sometimes hard to understand, but she does give an explanation when she's there. And she's very good. She's hard to understand sometimes, but she is very welcoming, and she always will stop and come out and do it. But it's always nice. And the second thing is that I made, during COVID, be sure that if they do allow you to come in, you don't touch anything at all, period. I mean, you don't pick up a joss stick or sit, just don't touch anything. Because of course they're trying to be very good about that.
Interesting. Yep. Go ahead, Sylvie.
So about temple in China, they're not very formal. You don't take off your shoes as you do in other countries. You can talk even around people who are praying. Of course, you need to respect them, but like the Tian'o Temple on Waverly is very small, and you will find yourself and your group very close to people who are praying, but you can talk with your group. Something maybe not to do is to point your finger at the divinities. You show the divinity with an open hand like that, but you don't point the finger toward the divinities. And Francis is really right. I mean, it's important to give donation to the temple. I usually don't ask my group to give good donation. Maybe you can do it because with American visitors, it may be different. With my French-speaking visitor, I don't ask them, but I always do give a donation. So Waverly, a Matsu temple or Taoist temple, even if they have Buddhist divinity in those 2 temples, but they are Taoist temple, the Guanyin, and I think the other one also, I'm sure the other one, the Golden Mountain Temple, are Buddhist temples. So it's important to maybe know the difference. One very easy thing to recognize a Taoist divinity from a Buddhist divinity. The Taoists, they have hairs and bears and long hair. So that's one thing.
Go ahead, Francis.
There is a Buddhist temple 1 down or 2 down from Tin Hao. The only trouble is he's so welcoming that he will give you a lecture that goes on for 20 minutes. And so if you go to that Buddhist temple, it's very nice, but the guy in there will keep the group in there forever. So that's the only problem with that temple, but it is a Buddhist temple.
Super.
Francis, which one is that? Which
I've
one?
forgotten the name, but it's literally right, almost a door next to, it's south of Tin Hao. And it's like, if it isn't next door, it's the door after that. And you can go in, and the guy is very welcoming. It's only on the second floor, I think. And but he has you sit down, and he wants to.
We need somebody to mute themselves. I can't figure out where the noise is coming from. I think we just thank you for whoever took care of that. Okay, well, we're close up against the clock right now. I dare say, if I may, that on any given day, on any given month, any given year, individuals, companies, entities of any sorts can be either winners or losers. And I would like to suggest that the members who joined this discussion group tonight are winners. I think the conversation has been absolutely fabulous. Thank you ever so much for joining, and continue the momentum with these discussion groups, because I would like to think that this is one way that all of us members can benefit with the time that we don't have to, or with the lack of opportunities. So anyhow, I just want to say thank you for everybody for joining. I don't know if you know that I have a personality. Well, you know that I have many personality disorders. One of them is that on Wednesday mornings, I generally have a onset of extreme loneliness. And the solution, I'm asking for assistance to keep me out of my doldrums, my Wednesday morning doldrums. Send me a very short email, any kind of comments on the benefits of a discussion group like this, because I think that the Guild can really benefit if we do something like this once a month, and build the attendance up a little bit. I've been trying to figure out where there's a threshold. Beyond some point on the discussion group, it gets a little hard to manage, the group. But I want to say thank you for, and come again next month, and be sure to sign up for Craig's movie tour next Monday night. Go ahead, Francis.
Yeah.
Oh, will you be putting out the recording of this so that we can go back on anything we might have missed?
Yes, this meeting is, sorry, I interrupted Sylvie at the very beginning by turning on the recording button, but yes, this will be recorded, and it'll probably be on YouTube for access.
Oh, that would be.
Yep. No, it's worth sharing. It's a this is the kind of thing that can benefit all members, and that's what the Guild is here for. It's the members organization, and you will see the board. I mean, I can give you, as you know, the new board has been elected and assigned, and I'm on the board, and I can attest that there will be communiques talking about the importance of small subcommittee groups, doing things for the benefit of all the members. Because if members don't participate, the board is going to run out of, speaking from experience, the board runs out of energy and capability to do it all. And so we're going to be asking for assistance from members, and just by attending, that's good because we get forward momentum. But we still need additional volunteers doing small, defined, short tasks, and we can grow and survive despite the pandemic. So once again, I thank you from the bottom of my heart, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Have a good day tomorrow. Let's all enjoy whatever's on television tomorrow, and we'll see you next time. Yes.
I think that was appropriately politically correct.
Yes, very much so.
You do have to.
Okay. You like that bucket, huh? Okay.
Thanks ever so much, and we'll be in touch. Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Len. Thanks, Sylvie.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.